Next, another recent Leo story. For an interview book with journalist Elise Ann Allen, published in Spanish but won't be released in English until early next year, Leo XIV was asked about, well, all kinds of things really, but one of them regarded the Church's approach to the so-called LGBTQ plus community. In other words, the pervert circle. Now, I can't quote all that Leo said in response because that would be too long, but let me just focus on a small excerpt of his answer that is quite revealing. He said, quote, "People want the church doctrine to change, want attitudes to change. I think we have to change attitudes before we even think about changing what the church says about any given question. I find it highly unlikely, certainly in the near future, that the church's doctrine in terms of what the church teaches about sexuality, what the church teaches about marriage, will change." Unquote. Now, did you see how clever of an answer that is? While at first sight he gives the impression of holding the line and not yielding on church doctrine, the fact of the matter is that the way he phrased it, he actually affirmed that church teaching could change on this. He just wants attitudes to change first. And that is a problem of its own, a change in attitudes. Leo is saying he wants to continue the Francis strategy of changing how people act and react with regard to sexual issues, and then the change in doctrine will follow without a problem automatically. Or better yet, it won't even need to change really, because who cares what words are printed in a book if no one actually goes by that? See, Francis's mantra was that reality is greater than ideas. Remember? And that's what he meant by it. He meant that what is done determines what is believed. So instead of having belief, the faith, determine how we act, Francis, and now Leo apparently, wants action to determine what we believe. That's why they're so interested in changing attitudes, or in Vatican II speak, pastoral accompaniment. Now, I think it's hilarious how Leo says he finds it highly unlikely, certainly in the near future, that the church's doctrine will change, as if he wouldn't have anything to do with it. Now, anyone who believes he's a true pope, whether liberal, conservative, progressivist, traditionalist, whatever, anyone who believes he's a true pope will have to agree that for him to say he finds it highly unlikely that doctrine will change really makes no sense. Because either he cannot change it, and then it's not just highly unlikely but impossible, or he can change it, and then it may be likely or unlikely that he'll do it, but it will be his doing. It will be he who changes doctrine and not just somehow doctrine changing. But in any case, Leo has clearly signaled with how he phrased this that a change in church teaching on sexual morality is possible. In fact, he is even more direct and explicit about it in his comments on the role of women in the church. He says, quote, "I at the moment don't have an intention of changing the teaching of the church on the topic." Unquote. Here the topic being the role of women, and that always, ends up being about women's ordination. Okay, so that's very reassuring, right? Not at the moment. Okay, thanks. By the way, as for the role of women in the church, check out this headline from Zenit, published on September 9th. Quote, "Pope Leo XIV appoints controversial woman as president of the Pontifical Academy of Fine Arts and Letters." Unquote. Yeah, well, controversial is a rather diplomatic way of putting it. The woman in question is Christiana Perella. She had been appointed to that Pontifical Academy by Francis in 2022, and now Leo has made her head of the institute. So, what's the problem? Well, we'll let Zenit speak. Quote, Her curatorial portfolio includes exhibitions highlighting nudity, queer identity, nightlife culture, and explicit explorations of sexuality. Unquote. Yeah, perfect, right? Just the kind of person you'd want leading the Pontifical Academy of Fine Arts and Letters, right? I mean, look, any decent person would shut the thing down before appointing someone like that to lead it. Okay, I don't think we need to get into any further details on this. Okay, we're talking about vile obscenities, and if you must know more, well, you can check the show notes to this episode for a link to this article and also to a report by LifeSite News. So clearly, anything is possible under Prevost. And I'd say that traditionalists inside the new church who are hopeful about him should seriously ask themselves if they really want to be attending the traditional Latin Mass under the umbrella of a religion that wants them to change their attitude towards Sodom and Gomorrah, blesses homo couples, and excludes the ordination of women only for the moment. With the way things are going, one day their traditional Latin Mass priest may just be a lesbian woman.